All right, so I'm recording this, so I'll post this on Facebook and probably on YouTube, actually. Now that I can't do Facebook Live, I can post it on YouTube. All right, so the book Psychic Dreaming, this book, is actually kind of a revised edition of an older book. And the whole concept, we all have experiences of all sorts of psychic types. But the most common that people always want to know about is precognition, is knowing about the future. And when it comes right down to it, the more common times for people to have these experiences happens to be when we are sleeping, when we're dreaming. How many of you had a dream that came true? How many had a dream that you wanted to come true? Okay, that's different. Unfortunately, you know, they don't always balance out at that point. For the dreams that came true, here's a question for you. If you remember them, what lets you know that it was a dream that came true? Was it when the event actually happened, or something when you had the dream, after you remembered the dream? Anybody? When the event actually occurred. So that kind of verified something you dreamed about. And for a lot of people, they actually recognize that it was a special dream when they wake up. And the interviews that I did over the years, both before I wrote the book and since then, you get a very common answer from people if they have a number of dreams, whether they are precognitive about the future or some other type of psychic dream. And that is how they knew the dream was special was because it felt different. That's it. It felt different. It seemed different. Sometimes I hear realer than real. It's excessively real. So you get this kind of picture that it's something that people cannot put into words. And otherwise, the only way you know that it was a psychic dream is you had a dream about something, and that you find out later that it happened, that it already happened, it came true at that time, or later on it came true while you were doing it. So we have different types of psychic dreams. The main type that we hear about happens to be the precognitive dreams, the ones that are happening in our dream state and then they come true later on. But what's interesting about those is that we always hear about the dreams of death and destruction, earthquakes, events that are going to happen, some major natural disasters, some big, perhaps a terrorist thing. Actually, one of the most famous verified psychic dreams that ever happened in Aberfan in the UK with a mining, like a huge mining disaster. It was actually a big coal pile that fell on a school. And people were having these dreams before about this terrible disaster. So we hear about these dreams of disaster. People had dreams before 9/11. People had dreams before Diana died. The things that bring up a lot of emotion. What's interesting, though, is if you look at all the dreams that are reported, because there actually was somebody who was collecting precognitive experiences back in the 60s and 70s and 80s. He ran the Central Premonitions Registry out of the New York Times in New York. And he would then, now this is before the internet, so imagine somebody writes you a letter, says that something is going to happen, or something is happening now, and then you have to spend time actually researching over the successive weeks whether that event actually happened without the internet. It's good that he worked at the New York Times because he probably wouldn't have been able to do it otherwise. So you end up with a lot of these dreams, and they're not always about disaster. Those are the ones that people remember the most. Those are the ones that get reported to the press most often. But people have very positive dreams as well. And more commonly, people have mundane dreams, dreams that have nothing to do with it. So actually, let me read from one of the experiences that's in the book. All right, so mundane. I had a dream about my mother's friend. I dreamed that she had on a dark blue t-shirt and she held up a check saying she got her income tax refund on a Monday. The next day, she went over to my mother's house. In reality, this is actually in the real world, had on a navy blue t-shirt, and it was a Monday. She had just gotten her income tax check. So is that any good to anybody? You know, I had a very vivid, now here's a not necessarily nice one, but I had a very vivid dream of hitting a deer with my car on the way to mail Mother's Day cards at a post office 3 towns away. That's the dream. The next week, in that particular town, I hit a deer with my car on Mother's Day. So not exactly, wasn't going to mail a check or mail a card, it was actually on Mother's Day. So there can be some things that are a little off. Now those kinds of dreams are common. People have dreams about what's going to happen at work the next day. People have dreams about a social situation. For myself, I've experienced a kind of deja vu, and this is one of the explanations for deja vu. You know, the idea of you experience something before, is actually in the situation you suddenly feel familiar, and you might realize that you had a dream about that situation. So that's the most common kind of deja vu that I experienced. And I've been very fortunate because over the years, every once in a while, I will remember everything the dream that's going to happen in the next few seconds, and I can start talking and saying the thing that the person is saying to me. So talk about freaking somebody out. It's always really good. I know exactly what's going to happen for the next couple of minutes. I can kind of describe that, and they get a little freaked out. But I'm a parapsychologist and a mentalist, so that happens all the time. So when we're talking about these, precognitive are a big chunk. For whatever reason, the future connects with us in that altered state that we're in, when all of our barriers are down. It's interesting because we should technically have more experiences of that type when we're awake, since that's what everybody wants to know. Everybody wants to know the future. And every day we check an oracle to find out what we should wear. You know, the weather guy tells us what to wear. Their predictions are often worse than psychics. And that's science. Remember that. There are other kinds of psychic dreams, though, and one of the other most common is a telepathic dream, also called mutual dreaming. And these dreams happen when someone you know, it happens often between spouses, it happens between people who are very close, it happens with friends even if they're not anywhere geographically connected, but something triggers a similar dream for the two of them. And you don't actually know unless you start talking to that person about it. So that's the verification that you had that same dream. Some people will actually have repeating dreams, so that repetitive dream thing, which psychologically is trying to tell you something, but also could be trying to tell you something that's going on with your friends, with your relatives, with somebody that you're dealing with. They can be telepathic in the sense that they can be mutually shared the same night, although we don't know if they're the same time. You know, one of the things that I cover in the book is basics of sleep and dreaming, and most people are unaware of how much we actually dream at night. Because we tend to just, if we remember dreams at all, we remember them from the last sleep cycle. We go through multiple cycles of an hour and a half where we go into deep sleep and come out. And actually, we don't even dream the first cycle that we're going in there. Of course, it all depends on how often your cats and dogs wake you up, but that's a whole different thing. So we go through these cycles. So 7.5 hours is good to 8 hours because you're going to have a couple of good cycles of dreaming. We dream for a part of that. If you wake up just after that one dream cycle, you'll remember those dreams. When you wake up in the morning and you remember having had a bunch of dreams in the middle of the night, they probably were dreams you had just then, not in the middle of the night. So when people talk about having a shared dream, and they both wake up in the morning with the same dream, we don't know whether it was exactly the same time, because it's not like the dreams come with a timestamp, or whether it happened, possibly they did wake up in the middle of the night and they remembered a dream and it stuck with them. So we have these issues about dream recall, and part of the interesting thing about dream recall, the fact that most people don't remember their dreams more than a little bit here and there, is where science gets involved. Because if you look at neuroscience, psychology, and into parapsychology and other areas, you find that what science seems to think dreams are for varies like that. There are some strict neuroscientists and other scientists. Francis Crick, who is one of the co-discoverers of DNA, wrote a book, and included in that book was his opinion, because it really is an opinion, that dreams should not be remembered at all. There's a lot of folks in neuroscience and even in psychology who say that you shouldn't try to remember your dreams. That all that's happening at night is your brain is kind of getting rid of garbage. It's basically defragging itself, if you know computer parlance. It's making space for things. So biologically, it's not good for you to remember your dreams. However, from the other side, and people who've worked with dreams, whether psychologists or dream workers, shamans have been working with dreams for thousands of years. Different traditions. The Iroquois nations on the East Coast had, especially one of the Iroquois tribes, specifically had dream work as part of their daily life. There are other cultures around the world that have had dream work, and you don't find negatives. The thing is, when people work with dreams, you don't find negatives. So if it's a bad thing to remember your dreams, but there are no negatives for remembering and working with your dreams, there's no evidence to support that negative piece. Of course, the neuroscientists might say, well, that's all soft science, so it doesn't really count. And that's really what we're dealing with. We remember our dreams, but we don't. Psychic dreams can happen throughout the night, but we have to learn to remember our dreams to some extent. Now, other types of psychic dreams that people actually have include a dream where you may think you've traveled someplace. You may have an out-of-body experience in the dream. This is not uncommon. What's interesting is on some occasions, the person you visited while you were dreaming actually sees you. They see you either 3D solid or they may see you as a ghost. Usually they figure out you're not really there because you disappear. So either you're a really good teleporter or you are projecting out of your body. That's sometimes called bilocation, and the out-of-body experience tends to happen either in the dream state or in the state as you're waking up, between sleep and wakefulness. Very common time for that to happen. Also, there are dreams that people have about history, and people seem to think they relate to past lives. The problem we have from a research perspective, if you have a telepathic dream, we have two people who have the same dream. So as long as those two people are telling the truth, right, we can confirm that they shared a dream. If you have a dream about, you wake up in the morning and you have a dream about something that happened in the middle of the night, and you turn on the news and it's there, unless someone was pumping that information into your brain somehow, you picked up on that information, kind of remote viewing. We can confirm that. We can confirm you didn't guess at that. For things about the future, we can confirm those things. We cannot confirm, however, with reincarnation, that what you're dreaming about is an actual past life. Because most people don't come up with enough detail to historically verify anything. You don't have enough detail to actually remember from your dream state. But there's certainly an indication, and some people seem to have that alongside of a spontaneous or waking recall of a past life. So it's really an interesting thing, and I know people have tried to have dreams about their past lives. I'm not sure if you all knew that you could program yourself to have a certain type of dream. You know, the idea of dreaming requires two pieces if you want to work with your dreams. One, and this is also with psychic dreams too. First piece is you got to remember your dreams. Right? And the best way that people learn to remember their dreams is before you go to sleep telling yourself, I'm going to remember my dreams, and when you wake up, write them down or record them. Or tell someone else who's with you within the first 30 seconds as soon as you wake up. Usually that gets annoying if you're waking that person up. So generally write them down or record them. And then listen to them and read them over again later on, because that actually reinforces the dream recall piece. As you get interested in remembering your dreams, you will remember more dreams. This is reported universally by everybody. But telling yourself before you go to sleep to remember your dreams is also important. That's actually called dream incubation, and it's a technique that goes back to ancient Egypt, possibly even further. The first dream book of symbols and such was written in cuneiform by the ancient Mesopotamians. The first evidence we have of dream work, dream incubation, comes from the ancient Egyptians, which are a little bit later than that. And what we find is that this is where the phrase, I'm going to sleep on it, comes from. That is literally where it comes from. That people will have a decision and they will let their dreams tell them what they should do. Now, of course, in ancient times, it wasn't your dreams, it wasn't your unconscious telling you what to do. It was the gods, or God, or an angel, or spirits, or someone else. Because, you know, we can't take responsibility for anything at all. So it was some outside force that was giving us this insight, when in fact it was your own insight, perhaps reaching out and grabbing some extra information. That incubation, that programming your dream, which is a very simple process of, I will remember my dreams, I need to have a dream about X. I need to have run-throughs about asking my boss for a raise. I need to know how my trip's going to go. I need to not be afraid of flying on the plane tomorrow. So you can do those kinds of things. And you can also say, I need to have a dream about something real in the future. I need to connect with someone. And once you actually get into the process of remembering your dreams, that idea of programming yourself for a psychic dream makes a little bit more sense. It can happen a little more frequently. Now, in that whole group of dreams, you also have something called the lucid dream. And that type of dream where you are awake in the dream state is a great opportunity to become psychic. Unfortunately, it's not a psychic dream, and it's not something that people have all the time. And again, people who are experts even on lucid dreaming are split on whether it's split decision. Have a lot of lucid dreams might not be good for you because you're not letting your unconscious play. In a lucid dream state, when you're awake in the dream, you can control the dream state. You control the entire dreamscape. It's a perfect time to say, okay, let's play out this scenario. What's the future going to be? I need to talk to my uncle. He's dead. It's a great time to be psychic because you can have superpowers in that and do anything. But if the proponents say that this is a great opportunity to do things, but the opponents who say you shouldn't do it all the time suggest that that kind of conscious control doesn't allow what we do need to do, which is let our unconscious play with stuff, put out metaphor and things like that. Although one of the folks I know who's done lucid dreaming said what he does, he'll in his dream state, he'll go into a movie theater and have his subconscious actually play the movie of the dream, because then he gets the benefit of both. It's a really weird thing. I'm not quite sure I would be able to do that. But with psychic dreaming, it's a matter of understanding that we have a general ability to pick up information from just about anywhere. And that information that we get can come through in the dream state much easier than our waking state for a couple of reasons. First of all, we're all programmed to believe, generally from our culture, this stuff is weird, that it can't happen, it's not scientific, doesn't have any evidence before it, so there's this general thrust that this is not real. There was a psychologist in Great Britain who identified a couple of other things for a lot of people. Even experiencing something psychic, you're inhibited from acknowledging that that's what really happened. It's called witness inhibition. That we see something, if you imagine right now if, I don't know, some of those journals just floated off the wall. That'd be really cool. But a lot of people would be freaking out. And especially I think people have to put the books back on the shelf, would be freaking out. But there's this idea that that kind of weird thing doesn't really happen outside of the movies. So people would basically explain it away. They would actually come up with an alternate explanation that makes absolutely no sense in reality, but makes more sense to them than somebody has levitated those books off the shelf. That's what we do. The same thing happens with different kinds of psychic experiences. With the other thing, which is ownership resistance, most people, even if they say they want to be psychic, they don't really want to be psychic. You know, there's this issue of what that could really mean. If you have a very narrow definition of that, I'd like to know what the future is like. But if you think about this, if you knew everything about the future and it was destined to happen, you probably would never leave your house. We're fortunate in that we can change the future, and I'll get back to that in a second. But we have this resistance. We don't really want to be psychic unless it allowed us to do some really spectacular stuff. I think that there are a lot of people who would normally be afraid of being psychic unless they could fly. You know, if they had superpower, true superpower, if they had X-Men type psychic powers, I think that it would be a different story. But for the kinds of things that we have, most people are afraid. Most people are afraid if they start being psychic because they will have experiences with spirits, or they will have experiences with picking other information up, or again, thinking that the future is going to come true. I've talked to a lot of people over the years who dreamed, for whatever reason, their psychology, at least what they remembered about their dreams of the future, was dreaming about a relative or friend who either got injured in an accident, was sick, or died. Again, we remember the negatives, unfortunately. That's what the news is all about. We don't remember the positives. So sometimes people start coming to think that they are causing those things. I've talked to a number of people over the years who have so many dreams of people dying. Now, they happen to be of an age where their parents, and like I am right now, the people, the previous generation are dying off. And you're going to have dreams, perhaps, of those people because of your concerns. But to come to the conclusion that you're causing it is a whole different thing. Some people come to that conclusion. Those folks have no ownership resistance. They actually think that they're causing this. They accept it. Most of us would. But the reality is that while we can pick up information from the future, we can change it. It's entirely possible to change the future. This is something that is a little weird. It happens in time travel stories all the time, where people go back and change something. So then if they change it where does the time traveler remember the future that they came from? It certainly happened in Back to the Future, but in a lot of time travel movies it changes. And also in the Terminator movies too. So let's see here. Where's this one I've got here? All right, so here's an interesting dream. This is one of the ones in the book also. I had a dream that my sister went for a long drive. While she was driving, her car began to swerve all over the road. She lost control and went off a cliff. I could see that her front tires had metal sticking through the rubber. When I told her of my dream, she remembered that some of my other dreams had come true. She took her car to a gas station and found out that the steel belts in her tires were broken and were coming through the rubber. Now, this could, of course, the woman never went off a cliff. So one could say that she was psychically aware of the rubber and the tires, and it might not have been a prediction of the future. It might have been a guess that if she drove that way, she would have some serious problems because she was aware of the tires. It also could be that she was aware that something like this was going to happen. She just changed that. So we have the ability, when we have specific information like this, to make changes to the future. There was a guy named David Booth back in the 1970s who called the FAA after having had a repeating dream for a couple of weeks of a 747 jumbo jet going down at O'Hare. He knew the type of jet it was. He knew that it was full and that it was going to crash at a certain time of evening. He did not know the airline or the flight number. He did not know the specific date. But he also knew what was wrong with the plane. So when he called the FAA, I spoke to, through a friend of my dad's from NBC News, I spoke to the FAA person who took the call, a guy named Jack Barker. And they took him seriously after checking on him a little bit. He was a computer sales guy in the fledgling computer industry at that time. He had no aviation background whatsoever, no mechanical engineering background whatsoever. The fault that he described was not something that almost anyone but an aviation engineer or mechanic would actually know. It was also a fault that was deep inside the plane itself, so that they actually would have to take the aircraft out of service for 24 hours or more. They didn't know the airline, they didn't know the date, so they took him seriously, but they couldn't do anything about it because they would have had to ground every jumbo jet at O'Hare for weeks until they were all checked out. And the airlines would never have gone for that. Had he known even one more bit of information, what airline, even a flight number, which does apply to different aircraft on different days, but still they'd have a limited set, or the dates, even just kind of limiting it to a couple of days where they'd still have a few dozen aircraft, but they still could limit that. They could have done something, would have put out a call. They did put out a general call to look for that fault, but again, they only were able to look for the fault for the planes that were already being worked on. So it actually happened. And according to the guy from the FAA, who they followed up with him afterwards, he was having survivor's guilt. He felt he should have done more. He couldn't have done more. He did everything he possibly could. In fact, in general, anyone who had a dream like that, without that additional specific information about the fault, probably would not have been listened to by the FAA at all. Because, yeah.
Do you think he could have programmed a dream saying, I want more information about this?
He probably could have. If he had talked to someone or knew about that, yeah, he probably could have.
Bought Lloyd's book.
Yes.
He would have had to read my book from the future. If he had a dream about what was in the book, yeah, many years later, that would have worked. Yeah, that could have worked. Or a couple of other of my colleagues who have written books similar. Yeah, that's the thing, is that if you have partial information and the event has not yet happened, you can ask for more information. You can try to program yourself. The problem there is that it might take a little while to get that information, because you have to kind of, if you've never been programming your dreams, it's going to take a little while to do that. We had an e-group back in the early 2000s run by a couple of my colleagues called the Intuition Network, and it included a bunch of psychics and parapsychologists and psychologists and other people. And when 9/11 happened, first of all, a lot of people who were part of that network had the same experience the night before of not being able to go to sleep, myself included, and then waking up when the event happened, like suddenly out of a deep sleep. Not a dream, but there was, somebody recalled seeing an earlier email from someone on the network who was no longer with the network, which we went back and found, which was about a jet hitting the Twin Towers. So, we didn't think anything. You don't think anything of that at that point because you don't know when that's going to happen, and it didn't happen exactly as he described. But there was that kind of sense that kind of came through. It's difficult when we are predicting the future. Quantum physics says that there's no reason why information can't come from the future, but that's at the quantum level of reality, not necessarily at the gross level. And of course, a lot of scientists will say that it's not possible to predict the future with information that comes from the future, and yet there's all these experiences people have that are outside of guesswork and day-to-day that just seem to indicate that it is possible, but they also indicate that we can change it. So it's kind of a catch-22. It's what are we predicting? If our dream tells us about a future and we make a change to that, we don't do what the dream said we were going to do. Like the woman who told her sister and she had her tires checked. She's not going to get into that accident now. So where did that information come from to begin with, if that future no longer exists? And that's where you get into this whole idea that physics is playing with these days of probable futures and many worlds, the multiverse and all that stuff. You have to really read comic books to get a full understanding of that, I think, for that. So it's an interesting area that we run into, and the whole thing about dream states is that it's the most conducive state for being psychic because the rules don't apply and the inhibitions we have don't apply. On the other hand, we can't remember our dreams word for word. So we run into this real issue of trying to figure out what's actually going on and recalling it at any point. Anybody have any questions before I go on? Yeah, Barbara.
So are you familiar with Asclepios?
Yes.
The Greek god of healing.
Healing,
so
yeah.
He was the first healer to ever walk the planet. He was born 2,000 years before Jesus on the island of Crete. And he was similar to the story of Jesus. Apollo, the god of light, is his father, who impregnated a Cretan woman and gave birth to Asclepios. And they called him the first healer on the planet because he would help people interpret their dreams. That's the true healing.
And again, we have the Mesopotamians who did that, though, thousands of years before that. It's a real tradition. I mean, the ancient Greeks did a lot.
Yeah.
And of course, their mythology sticks with us to some extent.
You know, my father was born and raised in Crete.
Okay.
So I'm half Greek. And he would always say, we're dreaming now. Life is but a dream. All this is a dream.
You know, if you go on the internet right now and put in life is virtual reality or something like that, you're going to find that there are physicists who are proposing that we're actually not living in a physical universe. There's some physicists who think we're in the Matrix.
Right, exactly. Because really we're asleep.
Right.
I mean,
well, there's that
in
old...
the Bible it says Adam's asleep. Nowhere does it ever say he ever woke up.
Well, somebody had to wake up to write the thing.
No, we're dreaming.
We're dreaming that it was written, yeah. Well, I wish I could dream my royalties were higher.
Try programming that.
I have tried that. I have tried that, yes. And I have dreamed that, but the checks still don't come.
Just because that's what you said.
No, the publisher has to dream that too. That's the problem. Yeah, you know, there's this old, it's an old story. The idea is that how do we know that we're not a dream, you know, living in a dream of some giant someplace or someone else? And the answer to that is we don't. You know, we can only we may be virtual reality. We're pretty damn good virtual reality. And now we're doing virtual reality in virtual reality.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, that gets a little weird. How many levels of reality? The whole question of reality is a big question. And people accept different ideas. The idea of the multiverse of many worlds is accepted by some people as fact, and yet it has not been proven other than mathematically. And it hasn't been proven mathematically exactly. It's a description of reality that includes different dimensions. There are some folks who suggest and have suggested from different traditions. You can go around the world to different cultures and you'll find that different traditions suggest that our dreams access other realities where there's either us or someone like us, and that's what we're picking up on. And in fact, our dream of the future is a dream of a parallel world that is like ours, but a few hours ahead or a few days ahead. So you get these different variations. The Australian Aborigines use the term, well, the term translates loosely to the dreaming or the dream time, and you may have heard that. It's not about dreaming, not on our side. The mythology of the Aborigines is that the ancestors walked the song lines, what you might call ley lines or force lines of the land, and as they walked, they dreamed, and they dreamed us up. So our dream of the real beings that exist in the dream time. We're actually the dream time. And there are stories of Aborigines from anthropologists who have supposedly been able to access physically this other dimension. I remember from college a couple of stories that I read in an Anthro journal. These anthropologists who swore that this Aboriginal clever man was going to go from southern Australia to northern Australia and visit another group up there, and so he'd have to walk 3,000 miles. I've flown that. It's a long way. And he got there in 3 days. He claimed he walked through the dream time. And in the dream time, in the real world, distance is different.
Well, there's no time, too. Right?
Well, it took him 3 days. He said it took him 3 days.
Oh, yeah.
But the distance was much shorter in that instance. They checked to see if he had hitched a ride on a plane. He couldn't have got there in a car in any way, shape, or form. He did not hitch a ride on a plane. I mean, the guy actually just appeared at one group after having left another. And there's many stories like that, where they utilize something to get into this other dimension. But that's suggesting that we are a shadow of this real world. There's science fiction writers who've talked about that kind of thing as well over the years. And this is something that, interestingly enough, if you look at the Aboriginal mythology and compare it to some stuff about quantum physics and this new idea about different parallel worlds and different dimensions, you can draw a really good parallel between what the Aborigines came up with in their ancient mythology and what we are describing as quantum physics these days. So they may have had access, and I can tell you from working with a few of them there that to them, the idea of being psychic, whether you're awake or asleep, is not special. It just simply is what they do. We worked with a Japanese medium for a TV show and had her do some remote viewing with one of the guys, one of the Aboriginals, and when he saw her drawing, which was incredibly good, matching up all the elements of a painting he was doing on the other side of a rock monolith at the time, he said, yeah, that's pretty good. Kids in Owen Pelly can do the same thing, 3-year-olds, 4-year-olds, and they're much better artists. So it varies, right?
Has there been a deeper study of versus the precognitive dreams versus the study of if they did that versus maybe doing a bilocational astral traveling? And like the source of the information was it could have just been precognitive, but was there a study of, well, did they go actually somewhere?
Did they go there?
So they come back? Was there a study of?
I don't know of any real good situations or reports, and I've worked with some people who do out of body about being able to go into the future. The only person who did regular out of body experienced travel who claimed to go into other dimensions was Ingo Swann. And Swann was also the kind of father of modern remote viewing. He was also an artist, and he had some really interesting visuals in his paintings that he claimed happened when he would go into other dimensions in his out-of-body state. And since and this was all precognitive and other kinds of dreams, but when he did out-of-body work, his book, To Kiss Earth Goodbye, which I'd really like to see reprinted by somebody, he visited Saturn and Jupiter, and before Voyager got there, and some of the features of what he described matched up with Voyager found. It was all contradictory.
Shh, please, quiet.
Remember, they're not really here. Yeah. So there have been some kind of super psychics around. There's been a couple psychics in England of recent vintage who have seemingly been doing really well with precognitive dreams, and they seem to be able to program their dreams and ask questions. And we see that kind of thing coming from certain psychics here and there. On the other side is that the other side sometimes peeks in, because we have these visitation dreams where people will apparently be communicating with a relative or friend who's passed away. And from our perspective in the science of parapsychology, we're not always sure if it's your mind needing to talk to that person, so in the dream you create this conversation you have with your grandfather, or if your grandfather actually came. Except that people have both kinds of dreams. And again, there's this feeling that it's different. One dream is different than another dream. We hear that again. It's that feeling that I was really talking to my grandfather. I wasn't just dreaming about him. I had a dream about my grandfather and talking to him. That didn't feel the same as having this conversation, which felt like I was really talking to him. So we have to go on this subjective perspective also, since there's no way to actually prove that the grandfather came through unless you talk to a medium who happens to blurt out, "You had a dream about your grandfather, didn't you?" Which can happen as well. So that kind of thing can happen. Any other questions?
You know, my sister had one of those dreams where my father, who had passed away, woke her up in the middle of the night and told her, "You need to go downstairs and get my stick pin so Mary can wear it at her wedding that next day." And she walked down the stairs. She was asleep. And she went in the kitchen into her washroom, and he said, "Now get a stick because the pin is underneath the washer machine." And she got a pencil, and she got on her knees, and she was fiddling around, and out popped the stick pin. And then she woke up.
And while she was downstairs?
While she woke up, while she was downstairs, after she saw the stick pin. And she didn't even know how she got down. I mean,
Was she on Ambien?
no. No, I don't even think Ambien was around.
That's
like
good.
35 years
Yeah, that's
ago.
the first thing well, I mean, on occasion people do sleepwalk. You know, we do get up out of bed and do those kinds of things. So.
But she remembers clearly he shook her and woke her up. So it's mind-blowing.
You know, the whole conversation with the dead, you know, the mediumistic type dreams are really interesting because there is a strong feeling that you get when you have a conversation that seems very real. It's the context, how it feels to you. I mean, just talking to a living person versus talking to your TV set feels different, even if you think your TV set's talking back to you. It feels different. Having a Skype call with someone is not the same as talking to that person in the same room. I know that when I do lectures or shows, because I do psychic entertainment, if I'm doing things, or some of the classes that I teach, if I'm doing something online, whether it's video or not, it is not the same as having the people in the room with me. Even if they are stone-faced and not saying a word, we get energy back from people. We feel the audience. We feel people. So it's always interesting when people have these types of dreams about friends or relatives who have passed away. You feel, I mean, you wake up feeling that was a real connection, as opposed to just having that conversation in the dreams. People actually just know that. They know the difference with that. And that's hard for science to deal with. This kind of subjective feeling that people have. You know, we can't prove any of that. We can't prove that we're all conscious right now, because nobody can figure out what that means. So we have this issue of not being able to put some things into words. All the studies of emotions around the brain are kind of biased because they typically study the brain activity of people who can emote. In other words, very often they'll use method actors. So are they really having an emotion? Is that activating the right part of the brain? Because trying to get somebody angry in a laboratory would mean slapping them around or yelling at them. And there are ethics that prevent that from normally happening these days. The CIA could probably get away with it, but not the rest of us who do research. So they have people who you ask them to remember a time that they were angry and get angry, feel the anger. That's not necessarily the same as feeling real anger or feeling love. So we're kind of skewed on this whole subjective thing and what's actually going on. There are researchers who are trying to figure out something straight out of science fiction, which is ways of reading our minds with devices, with EEG and other types of brain scan devices, so that when you think a certain thing, you can actually have that translated into a word or a picture. And in sci-fi, they have had, and comic books, they've had these devices that could be slapped on people's heads when they're dreaming, and on a screen you can see what they're actually dreaming. Right? We may get to that point, but we're not even close to that at that point, at this point in time. For that. And that would be really kind of cool if you could record your dreams, although you might not want to see some of them later on, but at least you have the option of deleting them at that point. Like a DVR for your brain. Kind of need that in some way. So I just want to mention when we're talking about this whole idea of dreaming, I want to go back to this thing about them being often very mundane. They can be surprising, however, but sometimes what can happen is how people react to you when you talk about those dreams or psychic experiences can be a problem. So here's another one. A friend of mine had broken his leg. He was in a cast for 5 weeks. I was absent from our class as a high school student. I was class the 6th week. I dreamed he had no cast in choir class, and I walked up to him and said, "I knew you had your cast off." 2 days later, everything went right into place, and I saw he had no cast. I went to him, repeated the words I'd said in the dream, adding that I had dreamed this would happen. He moved away from me like I had some sort of plague. Unfortunately, this happens. When people want to know the future, people will really want to know what's going on, but as soon as some stuff starts coming true, then those people think you're weird, strange, they don't want to be friends with you. They will pay you money if you're a psychic, but they will otherwise not want to associate with you, which is really unfortunate. And this is kind of a cultural thing. What's good about the dream piece is that everybody has psychic dreams. Everybody's had dreams that come true, and unless it directly impacts the person you're telling in a way that freaks them out, most people are not going to be that freaked out. They're going to write it off or say something else is going on in that case. Or they'll tell you about their psychic dreams for that. So that's what I have for tonight. If anybody has any questions, I'm happy to, yeah.
So how did you fall into this type of business to be a paranormal professor? Are you psychic yourself?
Actually, I did not fall into this because I'm psychic or because I had psychic experiences. In fact, most of my colleagues are not people who got into the field because they're psychic. They're people who, like myself, who were interested in this particular element of human performance and human possibility. For me, it was because of comic books and science fiction and television. As a kid, it just pushed me in that direction. I had a TV set in my room when I was 2 because my dad worked for NBC. And I started watching shows very early on, like Twilight Zone. I watched horror movies when I was a kid, but we're talking about the old Universal monster movies. I watched a show called One Step Beyond, which I really remember fondly, and I've watched a lot since then, which purported to actually take real psychic experiences and dramatize them, like the Twilight Zone. And then a show called Topper, which was a great show about two fun-loving ghosts and their ghost dog.
Oh.
Yeah. He was a guy, a banker, who moved into this family's house, and they had died in an avalanche, and they were back as ghosts, and they flew all over the world, and they skied, and they're partiers. So it was the only show, even going back and watching it, I can't imagine them doing it today, where the ghosts were drinking all the time. Even the St. Bernard dog was drinking. Neil was drinking all the time. That was like even the opening of the show. So
they carried brandy in their barrels.
Well, that's why he was drinking. Yeah, he was apparently an alcoholic dog when he died. But the spirits like spirits. It's one of those kinds of things. So I had this whole picture of that, and the comic books got me into really looking at psychic experience. And when I found that there was a science of this, I lucked out because of Dark Shadows sending me to the library to read books on vampires, and the books on vampires are right next to the books on parapsychology in most libraries, or in a bookstore for that matter. So finding out that there was a science to this, that people did have these abilities for real, at least that's what the science said. And then I was fortunate to meet a number of parapsychologists when I was in high school.
So now are you psychic?
I pick things up.
Yeah.
Over the years, I learned to pick things up. I've had a whole bunch of experiences. I had an out-of-body experience when I was dreaming. Before I wrote my first book, I visited a psychic who was taking one of my classes, and her daughter was 18. Tanita was like 44. I was in my 20s, and I visited them in the middle of the night. They were late. They didn't go to sleep till like 4 in the morning. They were both late night folks. And she called me to say that I showed up. And I remembered that I had the dream, and I remembered it. So it was a really interesting, I couldn't figure out what that dream was about. It's like, why would I go to their house, And they actually saw me there. So that was really kind of a cool experience. And that was because I was working with someone at a research organization who was doing out-of-body experience, and we were researching that. And he basically programmed me.
Yeah. I was programmed too for 3 days. And I was very psychic. I mean, I knew if someone said a name, I could tell that person everything about that person.
Wow.
But the minute I left that environment, it's all gone.
Different environments definitely allow us to be more or less psychic and more or less open. The people we're with can have that happen. The food that you eat can actually affect your being psychic. Yeah. So there's any number of things can affect that, just in general. And so we go through these periods sometimes where we can be more or less psychic. When I worked at this research place in New York, I was having a lot of experiences because Alex said I would. And he said I needed to in order to be a good researcher and in order to understand this. And then since then, working with folks doing investigations, I've picked up on ghosts. I have sort of a relationship with the ghost of the Moss Beach Distillery down the coast, because she's visited me. There's been a lot of interesting things that have happened to me over the years that I've worked with that place. So it just really depends on how you approach this and whether you're open to it, as we can all notice. And really what Alex told me years ago is the first step of becoming psychic is to notice that you already are. And certainly your dream state is one great place to figure that out, to notice that. Anybody else? Corey.
So parapsychology goes in lots and lots of different directions, and I'm curious what made you want to write this particular book?
Honestly?
Yeah.
My editor said, hey, would you write a book on psychic dreaming?
Good answer.
Yeah, no, I
Follow
yeah.
the money.
Well, that was part of it, but I said, sure, why not? You know, yeah, sometimes the publishers will make suggestions, yeah. Yeah, I have right now, I've got my agent and publisher was suggesting a book with some of the old Fate magazine articles from the 50s and 60s, and then commenting on them and kind of bringing them up to date. So I'm looking for a bunch of really cool old stories that we can kind of play with. That. Yeah.
Do you put Edgar Casey in the category of having psychic dreams, or do you see him as a whole different
Well,
thing?
Casey's a really interesting...
He's kind of a thing unto himself.
Yeah, he really was. You know, known as the sleeping prophet. A
Right.
lot of what he did in terms of his mediumistic abilities happened while he was in trance, but some of it happened while he was sleeping and dreaming, and would remember that waking up. He's probably the best documented psychic because from the very beginning, he had everything. He had a stenographer there through all the readings. They have all the readings written down. But the dreams that he remembered, he wrote down himself or would tell someone else when he woke up. And they would actually go from there. So he kind of had both. He definitely was a really good, interesting medium, especially focusing on health issues. But he had the dreaming piece as well.
There's an author now, and he goes around and lectures that he says he is the reincarnated Edgar Casey.
Oh, really?
Yes, and I'm trying to think of his name. It's on the tip of my tongue.
It'll come to you in your dreams
Yes.
tonight.
No.
Yeah, I'd be curious only because I
You
just
know,
wonder.
ever since I turned 50,
I'm assuming the
my
Casey
memory
people know
is
about.
like, whoa, let's see.
Plus you can Google it.
Yeah, I was gonna say,
Yeah, I'll have to check and
Google.
see. I can't imagine that the ARE folks don't know who that is.
Yeah.
Either for good or for bad.
Yeah.
'Cause one of-
David Wilcox.
yeah, I know
David
that
Wilcox.
name, but I'm trying to
Yeah.
remember.
Linda Moulton Howe's group.
Yeah.
Okay. All
He
right.
says he is the reincarnation. of
I'll have to
Edgar
ask
Casey. Yeah.
my friends at the Casey. Yeah. I'm going to guess that probably did not go over well with the Casey family. I'm going to guess that. Just having met Llewellyn and a few of the other people there.
Unless he was saying it when he was a very small child.
I don't know. He's a pretty interesting guy. He's written quite a few books, and he's in the Bay Area a lot. He's on the radio and stuff.
I've heard
Mhm.
him a number of times. He seems legitimate.
Yeah, it's pretty
And
interesting.
we can claim anything.
Well, yeah. And it's different. You know, the problem is that,
I mean, isn't there only one universal mind?
well, that's
That we
also a
tap
way of,
into.
you know, that's the thing is that there are several models of consciousness in general, and one of them is that all of us are actually little fingers of this universal mind. So our consciousness is not even in our heads right now. We are the TV sets. We're the
Yes.
interface. So the signal comes into our head like cable, and it gets filtered through your experience, the programming. So I'm a Sony TV, you're Toshiba. Yeah, so it just depends. All of us have this different thing, and that's why we don't think, from that perspective, when there's brain damage or a problem, consciousness doesn't get affected, just the interface gets affected with that. There are people walking around, there's very few cases of this, but there's something called hydrocephalia, which is water on the brain. And there have been a couple of really unique cases where the person had headaches and he went in and they checked his brain and lo and behold, there's nothing. It's all water. It's all water and liquid except for a little part of the brainstem. And that person should not be able to walk around, let alone talk, and they are functioning fully as a normal human being. And that kind of situation, just that one case alone, It's kind of like the white crow amongst all the black crows. It says there's something, there's so much we don't know about the brain or about consciousness. Just that one case. And there are several cases that are similar to that.
You know, how come this stuff isn't on the 6 o'clock news, you know?
Because there is, I mean, honestly, it's because there's such a huge, see you, Mary, there's a huge backlash in academia against the topic. It smacks of the occult, it smacks of weirdness, it just doesn't fit with...
How we make money.
Well, it doesn't fit with how we make money, but it also that's what science drives science a lot. But it just doesn't fit with the materialist, reductionist, general thrust of science in general, part of which goes back to how we make money, how science is actually paid for.
Took us away from our roots. Science took us away from shamans and from natural medicines. You know, now there's this movement trying to get back.
Well, you know, actually, science didn't take us away from natural medicines. The pharmaceutical companies just decided to figure out how to monetize them.
Oh, yeah.
You know, right now there's research going on to try to figure out how to monetize some of the chemical properties of chocolate into a drug, rather than just letting people have chocolate.
I just heard on the radio they now made a chocolate you can snort. It's a powdered chocolate.
You mean cocoa?
Yeah, but you snort it. And they
Why?
sell it
Why
on
would you
Amazon.
want to do that?
I know.
I mean,
Yeah.
why would you want to snort chocolate? You then can't taste it.
Yeah, I know.
That'd be silly. Yeah. You know, there has been the last 40 years. The bigger issue in the U.S. at least has been an organized skeptics movement. The group that started in the 1970s that has made it not only politically incorrect to be interested in this topic, but actually really difficult in an academic situation to express your interest in any of these topics, depending on who you are. So I have one colleague who got fired from the University of Florida because he had an outside interest in parapsychology. He was teaching psychology, yeah. The only reason he didn't sue is because his wife was still working, had a good job with the university. But we see that happening, with that kind of prejudice happening again and again. And anyone who, unless you're going to study it to deny it, that's a whole different thing.
He should have sued.
He should have.
If they retaliated against his wife, he would have got more money.
I told him that. He had a letter. He had a letter that said why he got fired.
Oh.
And write it. You know, it's too late now, but I did try to convince him. I even had a lawyer friend of mine call him and say, you know, we can make a lot of money on this. You won't have to work again. Yeah.
We're going to have a really hard time with ET's land. The ones that are coming from
Yeah.
our
See
future.
that in this
our
lifetime.
You're asking. I haven't had a dream about ET's landing, so I'm not quite sure.
Can you
I
program
absolutely
yourself
believe
to
it.
have a dream?
I can
about
try,
it?
but you know, the extraterrestrial thing. They have to want to land. Do they really want to
So,
land?
have you ever had a dream where you're paralyzed and you feel a presence in your room, but you can't? What is all that about? Because
Okay,
I used
so-
to have those all the time.
There's also this old, the name for the dream, the name for the situation called the old hag phenomenon. People refer to it as sleep paralysis. It's actually a malfunction of sleep paralysis. When we are dreaming, our neurons are firing. So if you're dreaming about running, the neurons throughout your system are firing and connecting with the muscles that would normally be used for running. We are paralyzed effectively when we're dreaming. Now, not full paralysis, but a kind of a light paralysis. Because if we were not, then we would be running in bed. So there's this protection thing that's happening to prevent us from acting out what goes on in the dreams. That's called sleep paralysis. That's normal. All right. So the problem is, if you've ever woken up in the middle of the night and your arm is dead, or your leg is dead, and then all of a sudden you get pins and needles because it starts waking up, that's not about circulation. That's about sleep paralysis. Your body has not completely come out of that state. Part of you has come out. Every part but the arm is still in that state. So imagine for a second that you're waking up in the middle of the night for whatever reason, and your torso is like your arm, numb. It can feel like something's sitting on your chest. If you're partially awake and you're still fully paralyzed, it can feel like there's a loss of control. It can feel like somebody's in the room. There's all these aspects of this biological thing that happens. So that's not paranormal. It's not psychic. It's actually a sleep disorder kind of thing that happens.
remember, it's been years since I did this, but I used to have these dreams, and it'd be a nightmare of some kind. And then I'd wake up and go, oh, thank God, it was just a dream. And all of a sudden there'd be somebody standing at the end of my bed. Because I was dreaming I was still in a dream.
Right. Well, that's,
I dreamed that I woke up.
Yeah. Don't you hate it when you dream that your alarm goes off and you realize, and then a few minutes later your alarm goes off because it was a dream?
That's just a freak on me. But these were nightmares. It was horrible because I'd be so afraid.
Nightmares.
And
Dreams can extend into that partially awoken state, that state between sleep and wakefulness. Sometimes our dream imagery can kind of stick with us. And people will hallucinate or have pieces of the dream still continue after that. What usually happens, though, if there's someone else in the room with you, they don't experience anything because it's your dream, it's your experience that's happening at that point.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean there wasn't somebody standing at the end of your bed, but it's harder to say that there was.
Yeah, no, because then I would really wake up.
You'd really wake up,
and it would be lighter in the room, or something was different than I knew
right.
that had been a dream. But it was just, I remember I did that several times, and it's really creepy to wake up from a nightmare
and then wake up again.
Nightmare,
yeah. Mariah.
And maybe the studies, is it more women or men that remember their dreams? And if there's certain demographics of the age of the people?
Well, we dream less as we get much older. They say that infants are I don't know what they dream about, but infants are dreaming like 80% of the time that they're asleep. Of course, they're asleep a lot too, but there's the brain activity that's going on seems to be dream activity. We see cats and dogs dreaming also. You can see when they're doing it. So we have less and less as we get older, and it's not quite. Nobody's quite sure about why that is. Although, again, that's evidence that dreams are not about getting rid of biological garbage, because as you're older, you have more stuff in your head to get rid of, right? You carry more, yeah. So technically, you should be dreaming more, not less, at that point.
But you could argue that a child is processing so much more infinite amount of information as it's trying to understand the world.
Correct.
That as we go on, we have more and more figured out.
Right. There's neural
There's
pathways.
frag in that.
There's neural pathways that are forming as children grow up. That's why kids have more nightmares than adults do. I mean, adults have nightmares, but children have significantly higher percentages of nightmares than adults ever do. And that seems to be because of the neural pathways firing and trying different things out and bringing up images and just childhood fears too. Yeah.
Did they do a lot of study of psychic dreaming at, I always destroy this name,
Maimonides. The Maimonides Medical Center Hospital in New York is where the initial dream telepathy research went on in the 60s and early 70s. Montague Ullman and Stanley Krippner.
Right.
And their book, Dream Telepathy, came out, I think, about 4 years ago in a new edition. It was after Monty died. Stan's still around.
Right.
So, and Alan Vaughan was involved in that book, that research as well. It was a sleep lab, and they did telepathic dream research, where they'd have a subject asleep in the sleep lab. And by the way, if you ever want to get a good night's sleep, do not go to a sleep lab. Because they'll wake you up like 50 times in the middle of the night. It's worse than being in a hospital where they wake you up to take blood. So what they would do is they'd give them a picture. The sender would be in another room. The person would look at the picture, and they'd be looking through usually a window at the dreamer, and then they'd wait for the dreamer to go into REM sleep, so they knew when the person was dreaming. And then as soon as the REM sleep seemed like it was petering up, they'd wake them up, because you always remember your dreams as you're coming out of REM sleep. And they'd immediately interview that person and then tell them to go back to sleep. Right? Sleepus interruptus. And they found that they were just, sometimes the participants could not literally describe the picture that was being looked at. They described elements of the picture. One that's in the video. There's a video about the out-of-body research at the ASPR where I worked. You'll actually, if you don't blink, you'll see me from 1983 in it. But it's up on YouTube. If you just put in ASPR OBE experiment. And in that, there's a little clip also of the Maimonides experiment where the dreamer is describing a beach, and it's describing a man in a red suit. And the image was Santa Claus drinking a cocktail on a beach in California.
Oh yeah.
So, you know, other than saying he was a jolly guy with a big beard and a big belly, that's a direct hit. I mean, that makes no sense from any other perspective. So they had a lot of hits like that. Couldn't describe it literally, but describe it in that way. And that book's available. So, all right. Anybody else?
Do you want to tell us a little bit about your ghost detective
Sure.
book?
Sure. So this book, which was co-written by my late investigations partner, Annette Martin, was a wonderful, really wonderful psychic and medium. And this is about our investigations in a very few places here in the Bay Area. We decided when talking to the publisher that we wanted to focus on giving people an idea what it was like to be with us, rather than just simply describe what the ghost was and what we found. So we went through Chinatown. We talk about the Mansions Hotel, which no longer exists and hasn't since the early 2000s, but it's still in all these haunted directories. So we talked about it because it was sold as a private home, but all these people seem to think it's there, and apparently the people who live in these two homes get visitors all the time. Is this a hotel? It's like, no, it's not. We went through the Moss Beach Distillery a bit, although I've written about that in other places, and just a couple other places, the Queen Anne Hotel, just a couple other places, just focusing on what people reported and what Annette picked up and what I was able to pick up from that. And the great thing about this is there's a couple transcripts in here of at least Annette's side of the conversation and my side, not the ghost side, but at least what Annette said the ghost was saying. So it's kind of a fun book, and we have a little tour guide information in here for that as well. And Chinatown's a really cool place. They do a great ghost tour of Chinatown. It's a good history tour, and it really some of the ghostly history of Chinatown is really very, very cool as well. So, and then I will mention that in 2 weeks, this book comes out.
Oh.
Right. This is a reprint of a book that's been out of print for a long time, and it'll be out from Llewellyn also on July 8th.
Mind over matter.
Yeah, that's what it's about.
Is that has anything to do with like a manifestation, like just creating?
I didn't cover the creating reality thing like The Secret covers. I didn't talk about that. This is really more about, actually starts internally from the body. So I talk about sports and martial arts. I got to interview, because my dad worked for NBC Sports, I talked to a lot of athletes over the years, pro athletes. And so we'll start with that idea that our mind over matter, our ability of our minds also affecting matter includes our bodies.
Yeah.
And that's for extraordinary performance and pushing ourselves and doing some really unusual
Jerry
things.
Rice used to imagine him running in a cornfield as that he was racing a horse.
Yeah, that's right. I remember him. Well, every pro golfer in the 60s read a book called Psycho-Cybernetics that eventually became known as Super Psycho-Cybernetics. And it was some guy's idea. It was visualization. And the golfers would all imagine, I talked to a few of the pro golfers, and they would imagine, as they're standing there at the tee, a dotted line from the ball to where they wanted it to go. And that's where the ball would go. And that is not necessarily
so cool.
not necessarily making the ball go that way, like affecting the ball itself. It affects your muscles so that you actually hit the ball the right way.
Wasn't it a famous golfer? There was some guy who was in a prison camp or something, or solitary confinement, and he spent his time imagining himself, I thought it was playing golf. And when he came out,
He could play golf. Well, there's
he just, because he, got to think about something, so he
Yeah.
would imagine himself playing golf.
there's
And
actually
he was a better golfer
there have been
than
studies in the last 30 years that show that if you visualize a physical activity,
Yeah.
you can do that activity better than if you had physically practiced it.
Yeah.
For a while.
That's what the thing was.
Yeah.
The guy was in a place where he could practice.
Yeah, what it does is it creates muscle memory. It actually affects the muscles of your body as if you were physically doing it again and again. So if you can practice that mentally over and over
So,
again.
if we had like a virtual reality thing put over our eyes of us working out,
I don't know if it's going to burn calories, but it would certainly make your body think it does.
that would be
Yeah.
Build up our muscles.
Yeah, no, there have been some really cool
Yeah,
studies of
very
muscle memory of that visualization
Yeah, I
technique.
know.
Yeah. So I also cover psychic healing in that book, and a little bit on ghosts and poltergeists. And then also how to do mind over matter yourself, how to make things move to some extent.
Oh, can you make something move?
Sometimes. And we're doing another spoon bending party in Lafayette. Yeah.
Very cool if you get to attend.
Yeah, I'm doing another one, doing a spoon bending thing towards the end of July when the book is out. We'll do another one there. Those are always fun. And last time I did one for the very first time, you two were there. I had somebody unbending the things that people bent, which was hysterically funny. It was really, things were really bent up, and these were utensils that, when you bend them, they should have snapped. Unbending them snaps them because they were very cheap spoons and forks and things. She was talking to the spoons, and they were unbending. It was very cool. Yeah.
That is very cool.
Yeah. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you.
And I have books
Thank
to sign
you.
here if anybody wants a book. Thank you.